What's up, everybody? John the Morgile here, signing in for yet another video as YouTube puts the hammer down on truther channels, also known as fake news, according to the real news companies. Speaking on behalf of all the real, actual truth channels struggling through the so-called algorithm change, which is actually a stab at killing the truth, we're seeking new venues to share our work, and YouTube tries to put the cat back into the bag, tries to be rid of its unique trait that once was really the crown jewels of YouTube, the ability to easily share your position with people who want to hear it, or you yourself enjoying compelling messages of truth with ease. Now, that really was an awesome thing with YouTube, and I can tell you there's a huge market on the horizon for people who desire to express their First Amendment right. Don't forget to resubscribe to all your favorite channels you were once subscribed to, if you can possibly remember them all. Meanwhile, we'll continue making videos here as long as possible for your enjoyment, as our view counts, search ranking, and subscriber base are whittled down by YouTube, and our core audiences are kept unaware of the content we work very hard to release. Of course, this bizarre backstabbery courtesy of YouTube doesn't seem especially pertinent to all quote-unquote truther channels. You've got brand new fake truth channels making meteoric rises, as it were, as the actual truth channels struggle to get their content in front of their subscribers and interested viewers looking for new content creators to view. It would be nice to have something like YouTube once was back online that we could migrate to. By the way, the phrase meteoric rise really is a terrible cliche, isn't it? We all know that meteors are typically going to be headed in the downward direction, right? The definition of a meteor is a noun, quote, a small body of matter from the ether that enters the Earth's atmosphere, becoming incandescent as a result of friction and appearing as a streak of light through the sky, end quote. So I'm really at a loss as to how a meteor would ever rise in any model of the Earth, flat or otherwise. This oxymoron of an analogy got me thinking about meteors and what they are, so at least the analogy accomplished something other than subconsciously confusing people about meteors. Of course, in the heliocentric model, we assume that meteors often come from collisions in the so-called asteroid belt, or just errant space junk brought onto course with the allegedly spherical Earth by the gravity of Jupiter. Of course, this is all ridiculous nonsense. However, the fact is, globeheads need an explanation for everything, so flat earthers need some explanations for meteors, it would appear. We could be like the globeheads and just make something up and then build dogma around it, and then force it upon all future generations of toddlers as fact. But we actually want to understand reality properly, so it's important that we remain true to the zetetic process of discernment, or the scientific method. In reality, we'll probably never have verified evidence of where meteors actually come from, but thinking about this has helped me to realize, and now explain to the very few of you who will get to enjoy the privilege of watching this video, how the explanation of the formation of the so-called planets, as well as the existence of the so-called asteroid belt, disprove the heliocentric model. Right, so we'll break this video down into two sections. First, let's deal with the problems just mentioned in the heliocentric model. Then we'll look at an interesting theory I have for meteoroids, or meteors, in the flat Earth model. So first, we'll do problems with the planet formation and the asteroid belt. So, the problem with the formation of the so-called planets, as described in the heliocentric theory, or the alleged existence of the so-called asteroid belt, is the described behavior of so-called gravity. So again, the problem that we have is the theoretical force called gravity that governs all things in the heliocentric model. Now, I should mention that the so-called planets, which I will refer to from here on out as either the planets or the wandering stars. So, in other words, please accept this as a blanket caveat for so-called or alleged planets. which are merely lights in the night sky, apparently moving relative to the background stars, hence the name wandering stars. So the idea of spherical worlds in space orbiting the sun is a myth, which I will show and prove in this video. Now, the prevailing theory of the formation of the planets in the heliocentric theory is a complex, intricate, steaming pile of garbage which will never be observed, let alone verified. It's important to understand what globeheads believe, even if they don't know it or understand it, especially if they don't know that they don't know or understand it. So, to understand how the Globe team believes the planets were formed demands we go back to the theoretical beginning of it all, the Big Bang Theory. According to the religion of scientism, the entire universe, everything was packed into an extremely small area. How one could get all of the billions and billions of extremely massive galaxies and stars and planets alleged to exist in the cosmos into an area the size of a pea, along with all of the energy of the universe, is still a mystery to scientists. Honestly, this isn't a big surprise to me, as modern scientists don't have a coherent explanation for the phenomenon of thunder and lightning, yet they claim to know everything about everything. Now, what was outside this extremely small area packed with everything in the universe is a mystery as well, and it boggles the mind to consider that enveloping everything packed into a pea-sized area, and yet still having the materials to have nothing outside the pea-sized area is sort of a mind-boggler. I mean, was it like a bowl of peas, or a single pea in space, or a single pea laying on the floor? This isn't even the point, but according to the prevailing theory of the beginning of all things, this extremely compressed area full of everything exploded somehow, and, because you would imagine that everything packed into the size of a pea would be extremely rich in gravity, right? Now, so everything exploded somehow and expanded at extreme velocities, and this was the Big Bang Theory. Now, according to Globers, this all occurred about 13.7 billion years ago. Science knows this because scientists know everything, even if they can't prove any of it, or simply observe anything close to it. So, one question I have is, what medium is all this matter and energy supposedly traveling through? The Big Bang explosion. If everything was contained within a pea-sized area, we must assume that space and time existed outside of it, right? Otherwise, this mysterious explosion would necessarily be writing time and space ahead of the cutting edge of the explosion. This leads me to the understanding that the pea containing everything in the, Big Bang Theory must have been a pea floating around in space-time and must have been extremely, extremely rich in gravity. In fact, so rich in theoretical gravity that it couldn't have possibly exploded, but okay, we'll give them the Big Bang. At any rate, at some point this hysterical explosion started forming stars. Now, stars are allegedly created by a process that is described as forming inside relatively dense concentrations of theoretical interstellar gas and dust known as molecular clouds. Now, I should mention that we do not have any evidence for these molecular clouds. These regions are extremely cold, allegedly. Temperature is about 10 to 20 Kelvin, according to scientists, just above absolute zero, which is a theoretical temperature. Now, at these temperatures, gases become molecular, meaning that the atoms allegedly bind together. These images, and many others like them, are obvious forgeries from NASA. Now, I've rotated them to adhere to the notion that there is no up or down in space. There is, however, certainly up and down in space art, so when the images are rotated 180 or 90 degrees, your eye will not be fooled quite as easily. Now, if you really scrutinize images such as these, you'll begin to realize how preposterous the theory and blatant forgery of star formation truly is. What I'll quickly mention is the fact that these clouds, these molecular clouds, are supposedly frozen. Indeed, only a cult as absurd as NASA and globism could come up with something as laughable as frozen clouds in the vacuum of space, forming stars somehow. This star-forming space cloud, or nebula, I like to call hermaphrodite nebula, comes complete with both male and female reproductive organs. But honestly, if these frozen clouds in the vacuum of space are forming stars within them, which is a major illogical leap of faith and theory, and confirmed by forged pictures from NASA, I would like to know who is lighting these giant clouds of dust and space debris. Who's lighting them for the shot? Do they have a lighting guy up there somewhere in the universe? So it's obvious that NASA is faking these images, and anyone who believes this is real must be extremely deceived and loving it. Now, according to Lions, quote,
A spiral galaxy like the Milky Way contains stars, stellar remnants, and a diffuse interstellar medium, or ISM, of gas and dust. The interstellar medium consists of anywhere from 10 to the negative fourth to 10 to the sixth particles per cubic centimeter and is typically composed of roughly 70% hydrogen by mass, with most of the remaining gas consisting of helium.
So we're expected to believe that some of the lowest density gases exist in a frozen state adjacent to an infinite, near perfect vacuum. Now, what I'd like to know is what is preventing these clouds from evaporating into the void of space? If you say it's gravity, then you simply don't understand the theory of gravity, which allegedly creates moons, planets, stars, and galaxies, binding them all together, and creates them out of gases floating around in the vacuum of space. Now, this is quite absurd because gases simply cannot exist as clouds in a vacuum. If you say this is possible because they're frozen, then how can it be a cloud if it's frozen? If you say it's a cloud made of frozen atoms or molecules, then we're back to the starting point question. Again, what is preventing these clouds from evaporating into the void of space? The fact is, star-creating nebulae only exist in the realm of absurd conjecture or imagination verse, and NASA has provided some really quite obvious forgeries to support their deceptive worldview, theoretically solving massive problems with the model by snapping these multi-billion-dollar pictures of liaria. So, with all that being said, once the stars are allegedly formed by this preposterous theoretical process, the stars themselves allegedly trail gases in all directions around themselves, even though they're supposedly traveling at super high velocities, somewhere around, say, 500,000 miles an hour. Somehow these gases remain stuck to all sides of the star as it travels. The gases surrounding theoretical stars after they've been jettisoned out of their birthing nebula, the gases around the stars then coalesce into planets. The planets are now theoretically fixed to their host star by quote-unquote gravity. Now, here's the thing. If the planets are tethered to their host stars by gravity, then what exactly was tethering the gases to the host star in about the same place as the planet is formed before the planet was formed? So, in other words, what was keeping said gases intact while supposedly existing in vacuo? Remember, gravity is allegedly an acceleration due to extremely massive objects warping space-time. Have you ever seen an extremely dense and massive cloud of gas that creates gravity just like a world does? And even if you could say that it is relative, it still doesn't solve the problem. If, say, the allegedly spherical Earth is kept at a certain distance from the Sun by gravity, because the Earth and Sun are so massive, then what was supposed to be tethering the gases around that region of space-time relative to the Sun before they were compressed into a planet by gravity? In case I'm not making myself clear, gravity is supposedly an extremely weak force, dependent on extremely massive bodies to affect space-time in such a drastic way so as to maintain a gravitic relationship between two objects zipping through a vacuum, tethered to one another by the gravity well created by the host star and reciprocated by the planet, again tethered by a vacuum and theoretical gravity. Such a reciprocative force simply would not exist prior to the creation of the planet, as the gases allegedly spread out over billions and billions of square miles simply cannot create the necessary gravity to complete the relationship between stars and high-density planets. Hence, such gases simply could not exist in the vacuum of space orbiting the Sun as the Earth does. It is impossible, even humoring the heliocentric model. Now, the asteroid belt is another form of this self-contained contradiction, and hence disproof of the H model, which is supposedly governed by gravity and chaos, of course. Now, according to the prevailing hyperbole of the religion of scientism, the asteroid belt was probably created, quote,
4.6 billion years ago, when our so-called solar system was being formed, a 10th planet tried to form between Mars and Jupiter. However, Jupiter's gravitational forces were so strong, so the material was unable to form a planet.
end quote, from Cornell University. Now, if we concede the illogical heliocentric premise that the asteroids are traveling 15.5 miles per second, or about 55,800 miles an hour, then how is it possible for them to remain fixed in their positions relative to the Sun, seeing how they are each minuscule objects compared to even the smallest planet? Are we to believe that each individual asteroid is adequately warping space-time to create a gravitic relationship with the Sun? Doesn't that violate all of the laws of gravity which dictate you must have a planet-sized object to reciprocate such a relationship with the Sun? Now, if it was indeed Jupiter's gravity that prevented the creation of this 10th planet, leaving the asteroid belt, then why do we still have an asteroid belt? The asteroids should be unable to remain fixed to an orbital plane and ellipse around the Sun at a given distance, mass, and velocity of each individual asteroid. The fact is, the heliocentric model does not work in this example, as it is comprised of error, faulty premises, and laws, arrogance, ignorance, and a blind eye to the plain simple truth. And that would be the heliocentric model again. Now, I really don't understand how all the physicists in the world missed this really simple disproof of their model. But again, they're never trying to disprove their model. They're always looking for data to support their model and ignoring data that disagrees with their model. So there is a bias in place, and I think that really needs to be addressed with science, because science is supposed to be unbiased. Now, gravity allegedly relies on two very, very massive bodies warping space and time in order to create a gravitic relationship through the vast vacuum betwixt the objects. Such a gravitational relationship can only be created by highly dense and massive bodies according to the globe theory, and simply cannot exist between one massive body and a distant gas in the vacuum of space. Theories for meteoroids in the flat Earth model is a little bit more interesting, I think. So, okay, with all that being said, whether you believe in all the steaming pile of garbage that is purported by Team Science or not, you really must admit that the theories they've concocted to explain the creation of stars and planets is pretty wild indeed, and will never be verified in a million years. Now, I don't want to behave anything like a liaretical physicist, so I will only offer theories presented as hypothetical, and I refuse to force all future generations of toddlers to consider them as laws or settled science. That's honestly the stance Newton had when he was commissioned to pen the Principia, which again he stated that it was hypothetical and probably wasn't true. I will go ahead and say that for my theory here, but what I won't do is I won't forge pictures. I'm not going to steal $20 billion a year from the US taxpayers to do so. I won't even steal a single taxpayer dollar. In fact, I don't want any of everyone's money to trick everyone, see? So, since I don't want this video to run too long, I'll just describe one single theory as to what causes meteors in the flat Earth reality, since we know the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, and the heliocentric model governed by gravity and chaos is physically impossible, even when really humoring the model for argument's sake. Now, I will quickly mention that it would be great if more of the globeheads out there could do the same thing, which is really the fundamental purpose of the scientific method in the first place, that is, to test hypotheses to see how well they match observation and reality. Now, condensation and precipitation of gases high above the physical plane may be an answer for this, in reality. Now, if we assume the lightest gases, such as hydrogen or helium, are forced above the higher density gases in the troposphere plane, then what becomes of these gases, again hydrogen or helium? They are not sucked out of the system into the vacuum of space, as you'd expect, even according to the globe Earth model. Now, Alliance claims that single molecules of hydrogen or helium reach escape velocities and are jettisoned off into space, but it takes billions of years for them to do so, so we pretty much are stuck with the atmosphere we've got somehow, even though the upper portions of the atmosphere allegedly exist adjacent to the vacuum of space, which is impossible. So, my point is, like water vapors evaporate and condense into clouds and then precipitate as rain or hail, then why would it be so far-fetched to assume that helium or hydrogen can do something similar? This might sound really far-fetched at first, but when you research meteor strikes throughout Earth's history, they really are quite slim, and really so is the physical evidence for them, especially when you compare the face of the Earth to the face of the Moon, which, according to the heliocentric model, is really quite riddled with pockmarks from inbound space rubble and meteoroids. But when you look at incidents in recent history, for example the Tunguska event, you'll find about 800 square miles of leveled trees caused by a so-called asteroid that hit the area in remote Siberia in 1908. It took scientists like 20 years to reach the epicenter of the impact, and some scientism nutjob claiming to be an expert in asteroids and meteors allegedly found traces of, guessed what? Asteroid meteors in the area. The problem is, whenever large objects fall from the sky like this, there's rarely a trace of the so-called rocky meteor, let alone a massive alien chunk of stone in the spot where you'd expect to find it. Now, this leads me to believe that the meteor showers, or even large meteors that pass through the atmosphere at high velocities, could be frozen gases as opposed to rocky asteroids from 90 million miles away. Now, I could be wrong about this, but that's why we call it theoretical physics, because we're allowed to sort of play with theories. We can come up with theories that are not testable, and then force them on all future generations of toddlers to conform to our belief system. But honestly, I think this makes a lot more sense than high-density asteroids traveling some 90 million miles to reach Earth, crashing through our sky only to evaporate in the air prior to impact. Now, have you ever seen a solid rock evaporate after flying through a gas at high speeds? It makes perfect sense, right? Okay, so if we assume the flat Earth reality, this actually makes a lot of sense that they evaporate in midair. If we're dealing with condensed frozen hydrogen or helium. And I believe this really seems like a natural order to things, especially when we understand, condensation and precipitation of water vapors. And at least for me, it meets the Occam's razor test. It's simple, makes sense. So it's a simple answer that jives with observation and known physical laws. It's perfect. So, since we know that gases like hydrogen and helium indeed rise well above the warm troposphere, with temperatures becoming colder as the ambient atmosphere becomes less and less dense, I realize this theory is really only for people who have come to terms with the fact that the Earth is a stationary plane, so if you're a globehead trying to insult me because you think it's stupid, I don't care. Next, we'll talk about comets. I recently did a pretty long documentary, section 1, about Halley's Comet that I can almost guarantee you haven't watched, as I released it over a month ago, and not even half of my subscriber base count has so much as clicked on the video. Either that, or maybe YouTube deleted about 11,000 view counts from that one video alone. Who knows? It's just a theory. Anyways, during that video, again, this would be the one I did about Halley's Comet about a month ago, of YouTube, the ability to easily share your position with people who want to hear it, or, you yourself enjoying compelling messages of truth with ease. Now, that really was an awesome thing with YouTube, and I can tell you there's a huge market on the horizon for people who desire to express their First Amendment right. Don't forget to resubscribe to all your favorite channels you were once subscribed to, if you can possibly remember them all. Meanwhile, we'll continue making videos here as long as possible for your enjoyment, as our view counts, search ranking, and subscriber base are whittled down by YouTube, and our core audiences are kept unaware of the content we work very hard to release. Of course, this bizarre backstabbery courtesy of YouTube doesn't seem especially pertinent to all quote-unquote truther channels, sit upon all future generations of toddlers as fact, but we actually want to understand reality properly, so it's important that we remain true to the zetetic process of discernment, or the scientific method. In reality, we'll probably never have verified evidence of where meteors actually come from, but thinking about this has helped me to realize, and now explain to the very few of you who will get to enjoy the privilege of watching this video, how the explanation of the formation of the so-called planets, as well as the existence of the so-called asteroid belt, disprove the heliocentric model. Right, so we'll break this video down into two sections. First, let's deal with the problems just mentioned in the heliocentric model. Then we'll look at an interesting theory I have for meteoroids, or meteors, in the flat Earth model. So first, we'll do, you've got brand new fake truth channels making meteoric rises, as it were, as the actual truth channels struggle to get their content in front of their subscribers and interested viewers looking for new content creators to view. It would be nice to have something like YouTube once was back online that we could migrate to. By the way, the phrase meteoric rise really is a terrible cliche, isn't it? We all know that meteors are typically going to be headed in the downward direction, right? The definition of a meteor is a noun, quote, a small body of matter from the ether that enters the Earth's atmosphere, becoming incandescent as a result of friction and appearing as a streak of light through the sky, end quote. So I'm really at a loss as What's up, everybody? John the Morgile here, signing in for yet another video as YouTube puts the hammer down on truther channels, also known as fake news, according to the real news companies. Speaking on behalf of all the real, actual truth channels struggling through the so-called algorithm change, which is actually a stab at killing the truth, we're seeking new venues to share our work, and YouTube tries to put the cat back into the bag, tries to be rid of its unique trait that once was really the crown jewel to how a meteor would ever rise in any model of the Earth, flat or otherwise. This oxymoron of an analogy got me thinking about meteors and what they are, so at least the analogy accomplished something other than subconsciously confusing people about meteors. Of course, in the heliocentric model, we assume that meteors often come from collisions in the so-called asteroid belt, or just errant space junk brought onto course with the allegedly spherical Earth by the gravity of Jupiter. Of course, this is all ridiculous nonsense. However, the fact is, globeheads need an explanation for everything, so flat earthers need some explanations for meteors, it would appear. We could be like the globeheads and just make something up and then build dogma around it, and then force